So, life, city and climate change, right? That's what we were trying to explore in this course called Life in the City in a Changing Climate. So what we were trying to explore in this course was relationships between life, city and climate change. Now, there are a couple of really interesting things that emerged. Okay, so I've worked with many children around climate change, and what I realized was they knew the terms, they were familiar with the jargon, they even knew some of the mechanics of climate change. But when it came to really relating climate change to their lives, their realities, to the cities they live in, I think this course really sort of helped them come face to face with that. So now let me sort of try and share what I meant by that. So we explored a few questions about how these three things are related: life, city, climate change. And what was very interesting was, I thought actually that we would explore these questions through different ways of learning, right? So children are very used to watching TED Talks and videos and all that. So I first started with a TED Talk by Suzanne Simard on how trees communicate with each other. Now that blew their minds because they never really thought that trees can communicate. Then I gave them a reading, okay, by Lewis Mumford, and he wrote this book called The Natural History of Urbanization. When I gave them that reading, and I just gave them a few extracts, okay, for them to understand what is urbanization. And what was interesting was they protested. They said 4 pages of reading, like really, you got to be kidding. And then they read it and they were like, it's so dense, we can't understand anything. I said, no, just stick with it, okay? I don't care, you have to read it and tell me what you got from it. Now, when each group presented, so what I made them do was each group had to read it aloud so that everybody heard the other. And then what emerged from their reading actually really surprised me, because they were able to extract some very essential points from what Mumford was talking about, how the expansion of the city ate into the hinterland, and they related it to their own cities. You know, how it's encroaching into rural areas, rural resources, etc. And what was even more fascinating was how all the groups, okay, and there were 4 groups, they actually talked about access to resources, how equality and equity of access to resources is a problem when we talk about urbanization. So that was very interesting. Now the other thing that I realized was, even though they complained so much, when they had to work on their projects, right, all of them have, you know, taken elements out of that reading and incorporated it into their projects. For instance, one group focused only on adaptation to climate change. And then there was another group that actually looked at forests and biodiversity and how they could build it into designing of a city. And there was a third group that did a very different thing. You know, they looked at services in a city and in terms of equity of services. Okay, so I mean, what really surprised me was how maturely children were able to pick out some of these things from what I thought might be quite a demanding course, and they did complain that it was a demanding course. But I really, when I reflect on it, couple of learnings for me. You know, one is that I shouldn't be afraid to push children. You know, there is so much spontaneous learning that happens when you push children. And the second thing is, I think as teachers, as educators, as parents, we don't really give them enough material to read, abstract, and try and understand what they make of it. We are so used to giving them stuff because we judge and we say, oh, I think this might be too complex for them. So I think we really need to push children, because I think we underestimate them and I think we shortchange their learning process by not doing this. So overall, as always, working with children, it's such a learning process for me, and my reflections from this program will actually include this thing of, you know, providing abstracts and extracts to children so that they can learn from that process. And multimedia learning, I mean, I don't think there's any substitute for that. So yeah, very, very enjoyable course and much learning as always.